So today, what I would really like to discuss are two aging pathways that, if addressed or optimized, could probably allow you to clear out your medicine cabinet. So stay tuned. Howdy. My name is James Blessman, and you're here at Smart Place, where we try to discuss those things that help to optimize your life, or at least I discuss those things that I find helpful. This is not really medical advice, though I'm a doctor. And the reason why it's not advice is because I don't really know your medical condition. So you will need to discuss these things that you hear with your own physician to see whether or not they are applicable to you. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is metabolic syndrome. I've been fascinated with this topic over the last 2 years because it's starting to allow me to appreciate that we are not dealing with multiple medical conditions. We're probably dealing with different faces of the same problem. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you go back, the idea of this co-occurrence of medical conditions, things like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, and the like, seem to go together, if you will. And this relationship was identified back as early as 1950 or even earlier or so. And by the 1980s, as they were looking at this, the question began to raise, are there things that are a little upstream that connect these, that start before these different manifestations of high blood pressure or elevated blood sugar, those type things occur? And as they looked at this, the first thing they noticed was the relationship of insulin resistant, meaning that in these conditions, individuals seem to have elevated insulin levels. Now, at the time, this was pretty radical thought because, particularly in diabetes, it was always thought that individuals didn't have enough insulin and not that they had high levels of insulin that were just not really being effective. So there are many papers that have been written on this. You can Google metabolic syndrome if you like. I have a link to a particular paper that I found interesting where it was mentioning there are some things that are upstream, like not only insulin resistance, but oxidative stress, a lot of different inflammatory markers, so on and so forth, that seem to be upstream from the metabolic syndrome itself. And where I've tended to land is what seems to be at the root of all of these conditions is what I would describe as mitochondrial insufficiency. Okay, so what does that mean, mitochondrial insufficiency? Well, the mitochondria are an interesting organelle, which is a kind of an organ within our cells. And when I was trained as a physician, I was always taught that the mitochondria was responsible for energy production. So if you can imagine, if the cell can't create energy, then it can't really survive. But it turns out the mitochondria is more important than it does things other than just energy production. And one of the things that it does is it seems to be the main regulator for the cell. Somehow I missed that. I don't know if I was asleep during that part of the class or what have you. But that it wasn't really presented to me in that fashion. That becomes particularly important because if the mitochondria are having difficulty, then not only can it not produce enough energy, but it can't regulate the cell well. You know, when to grow, when to not grow, when to make your substances, when to not make your substances. So depending upon which cell is and system is impacted the most, it can vary in terms of how that looks, whether or not it is high blood pressure or diabetes or cancer or whatever. Because what we're finding is it seems as though this metabolic syndrome seems to be present in other conditions that are not typically associated with the syndrome. So it does seem to be really important. So how prevalent is this? Well, there's a sense that probably about 25% of the population, anywhere from 25 to 30%, that's like, 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 are challenged with metabolic syndrome. Now, that's where you have kind of 3 of 5 clinical conditions, again, which you can kind of look up to see, but it usually centers around high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, and elevated lipids. So when you have 3 of these things, you likely have metabolic syndrome. But what I'd like to impress upon you is that even if you don't have the criteria for metabolic syndrome, that doesn't mean that you aren't suffering from some type of metabolic deficiency that is involving your mitochondria. And it seems as though what's happening is that the cells are in essence overworking. They're creating a lot of what's called reactive oxygen species. So these are things like, you can consider them more like waste products within the cell. And so if you can't clear waste products in the cell, just like if you can't clear waste products from your body, you get to the point where you're not really functioning very well. So if the mitochondria are not functioning well as some of the other organelles within the cell, then you won't be functioning very well. And again, depending upon what system is being challenged the most, it could be your GI system, so now you're having stomach issues. It could be your heart, so now you're having heart issues. It could be your lungs, and so now you're having lung issues, so on and so forth. So it can look differently, but the root cause is really the same problem, okay? So, and it's important for us to figure this out, because when people are not feeling well and they can't reach their full potential, then we all suffer from that. And I'm going to put a link to another video I did about prosperity. It kind of talks about the principle of comparative advantage. And it really drives home the point that the better an individual does, the better we all do. Okay, so metabolic syndrome. So what do you do about it? If you have mitochondrial deficiency as a consequence of this? Well, the first question is, do you think that you have a problem? And remember that the mitochondria is responsible for making energy. So maybe one of the first signs that you notice is that you just don't have the amount of pep that you had before. And so you got to drink more coffee, or you feel like you need to get more rest, or that type of thing. That could be a sign that your mitochondria are having difficulty meeting the needs. Are you having a lot of stomach issues, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, so on and so forth, which can also suggest that you can't really assimilate or get the nutrients that you need. And so that becomes evidence of another problem. But, look for things like obesity and hypertension and diabetes, and so on and so forth. And I would say if you have an ever-expanding list of medications within your medicine cabinet, it could mean that there is a mitochondrial challenge. And the other thing that is clear about that is that while the treatment of these individual conditions can likely help with the symptoms, realize they aren't really correcting the metabolic abnormality. So as an example with diabetes, you have elevated blood sugar from insulin resistance. We give you certain medications that might increase your insulin levels, but realize that having insulin was not your problem, is that your insulin was a little less effective, so you needed more to begin with. Our treatment doesn't really address the underlying root cause, which allows the progression of that issue, and you just get worse over time, needing more and more medication, more and more medical conditions, so on and so forth, because we aren't really addressing the root cause of the problem. So what could be the root cause? Well, in thinking about this, there was a book written by Dr. Michael Greger, where he mentions about 11 processes that seem to be important in aging. And so in the spirit of the Pareto principle, usually if you have kind of 10 things that are important, 20% of them, or 2 of those, will give you your greatest return on investment. So he didn't necessarily say this, but I think that the 2 things that you need to pay attention to and to try and optimize involve glycation and autophagy. So those are 2 other words that you can look up. So what is glycation? Well, here's the interesting thing. From the time that you were born, right, you have within that single cell all of the instruction to make all of you: your eyes, nose, mouth, so on and so forth. And it knows when to make it, where to put it, so on and so forth. Now, not only do you have to make these structures, you also have to make the workers that make these structures. And the workers primarily come from the protein class. So, you think about what we assimilate from our food, we get it mainly in the form of carbohydrates, protein, and fats. And then there are some other chemicals and that type of thing, metals, that are also important in that. But you mainly have those 3 substances to work with. The workers primarily come from the protein class. And when the workers are working as proteins, and these are things like enzymes, antibodies, so on and so forth. When they're working, they're moving. They're folding and unfolding. If I stick a sugar on there, it's like putting a stick in the gears of a mechanism, and now the protein can't fold and unfold. And so now you are impairing your workers. And so if those workers are responsible for regulating certain things in your body, like preventing the accumulation of reactive oxygen species, which is the things that's likely poisoning the mitochondria, you can no longer regulate that. And so that becomes problematic for you. So if you can address glycation and not have too much glycation, you will do well. Now, we notice this in diabetics because as your glycosylated hemoglobin goes up, your health goes down. As your glycosylated hemoglobin goes down, your health goes up. But realize this and I'm sorry about that, but this glycation process is affecting more than just insulin. There are likely other receptors or chemoreceptors in the body or signaling pathways that are becoming less efficient because of the whole glycation process. Well, so where does the glycation come from? Well, there are 2 sources. One is when you get too much sugar, primarily sugar, and I'm going to say fructose in the body, it can be problematic. And then the other way actually comes from cooking. And so the other thing to Google, if you want to know about this, is what's called advanced glycation end products. So just educate yourself about that. There's several videos that have been written about that. But what you want to do is minimize the impact of advanced glycation end products. And as a testament to that, there's a book written by Luigi Cornaro, who was, this was written in the 1500s, where at the age of 35, he was so sick he wanted to die, and the doctors at the time thought he was going to die. And what he did was he changed his diet so he was eating primarily soup, okay? And within the soup was like meat and vegetables, and he limited the amount of calories. So it was, I think, like 12 ounces of food per day, and then 16 ounces of wine is every day. So he decided to eat like that, kind of eating the way you would eat if you had a febrile illness. You don't put a lot of heavy food on your stomach at the time. So he tried this. A week later, he felt better. He decided to continue that. And after a year, all of his medical problems went away. This guy goes on to live and be productive, even civically, to the age of about 100. And at the time, he still had all of his teeth. He could climb and ride a horse. He had no deficits in his vision or hearing. And this is starting from a place where it was thought that he was going to die in about 6 months. And so he was able to eradicate all illness from his body. But what's interesting about him mainly eating soup is, remember I talked about advanced glycation end products. These things are created when food is brown. So when you bake it, when you fry it, when you grill it, you have a tendency to increase these advanced glycation end products, which do seem to have a negative impact on health. So the more you can minimize those things, the better. And it seems to be more important, or I should say, grilling vegetables is not as harmful as grilling meat. So you can make a lot more advanced glycation end products in meat cooked at high temperatures than vegetables cooked at high temperatures. So it just becomes one thing to look at. The other process to look at is autophagy. And so autophagy means kind of eating your own cells, if you will. And so what happens is when calories are not plentiful around, you will have a tendency to go and repurpose kind of damaged cells, proteins that are no longer functional. And so you'll go and kind of break those down and reuse them. So you can think of it as a way to clean house. And so if you don't clean house regularly, eventually your house gets to a point where, you've stuck something over here, stuck something over there, stuck something over here, and things become so congested it can't really work very well. And so if you can do things to enhance autophagy and minimize the amount of advanced glycation end products, I guarantee that you will have less trouble with metabolic syndrome, and a lot of your medical challenges will just disappear. So in any event, we'll be talking a little bit more about that in some upcoming videos. But I just wanted you to hear metabolic syndrome, mitochondrial insufficiency, advanced glycation end products, and autophagy. Understand these principles, optimize your health around these principles, and you will do much better. But again, that's not medical advice from me. Don't screw up your life. Don't come fussing at me. I just say educate yourself, talk to your doctor about it. The best to you. All right. Bye-bye. Wait a minute. I may have ended that a little prematurely. Let me just say that some of the things that are going to come up. So I mentioned that there are some things we're going to talk about to help correct this condition. And these things are going to be in the domains of mental fitness, nutritional fitness, physical fitness, and social fitness. And of all of those things, I'm going to say the most important thing is mental fitness and getting to a place where happiness is familiar to you. And I'm going to give you a tip on how you can flip things that are frustrating and get to a place of unconditional love. So again, we're going to be talking about things in mental fitness, nutritional fitness, physical fitness, and social fitness, which is about understanding why you're here and your purpose. And oftentimes, well, I should say oftentimes, what I'm also going to say is when it comes to your purpose and why you are here, and if you are breathing, you have purpose. Just remember this phrase, that the sculptor creates his masterpiece by removing everything that doesn't matter. Peace. I said that was the final thing, but the final thing is, if you would like to have further conversation with me about this or anyone else, I do have a website called smartplace.today, where it makes it easier for us or those who are interested in this topic to have a two-way conversation. It's more of a social media website around matters of health and where we try to improve the conditions in which we find ourselves. So again, that's smartplace.today. There's a link in the description to take you there. So feel free to go by there and leave comments there as well. You should be able to find it. I probably would create a hashtag Smart Place Podcast or YouTube or something like that makes it easier to find these episodes. All right. Bye-bye. I think that's it.
I don't think I'm coming back again, but I could. I don't know. That's the way it works. I'm sorry. This is number 3. I'm just beginning, and I'm still trying to learn my way around this. And it's not like a big fanfare. I don't have a whole team. It's just me trying to make this happen, and I just have these things on my heart because I'm tired of the amount of illness that I see, and I just think we can do better by making smart place today. All right, bye-bye.